Welcome back to the Nursing Post podcast, where it's all nursing all the time. Today, we are talking about a subject that I feel like we shouldn't have to be talking about, but we are, and that's polio. And just as a reminder, of course, we are here to spark conversation and to inform. So hopefully, you learn a little something new about a new old disease.
It's sad that we have to refer to it that way.
Well, kind of that's the way I look at polio. Like, we're still talking about this. Okay, sure.
Yeah. No, I get it. I'm how old and we're still talking about this? No, I get it. I get it. So I grew up as an Air Force brat, and of course, we tended to move around like every 2 to 3 years.
Mhm.
So I can tell you one thing for sure besides your birth certificate, the other most important document that you needed for traveling was, and I'm going to tell how old I am right now again, is that long yellow immunization card
Hey, I
that
followed
just
it down
followed
to,
you.
like, nothing.
It folded to this like an index card, and then literally when you opened it, it just kind of fell like an accordion. So like
Yep.
legit, you had that vaccination record along with your birth certificate, and you couldn't be in school on base or even out off of base. They would not let you enroll because you had to have your shot records and your birth certificate. So if you lost either or, because back then we didn't have EMR, like you were pretty
Mhm.
much up the creek without a paddle. You were then trying to get titers to prove that you were immunized, against all of these illnesses and diseases.
I'm gonna tell you, military persons are the best record keepers. Like, when they come into the office and things, if they've been on any kind of military, base, or if they've been in the military, and they have everything, like,
They have their
everything. They
crap
have their
together.
stuff together. It's kinda crazy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. And so I know like for sure those two things because moving around a lot, there was a lot of new schools.
Mm. Yeah.
And so it boggles me that in my lifetime where polio was once eradicated, meaning no longer in existence,
Mhm.
that we are now again, like we mentioned before, having
Mhm.
this same freaking conversation about polio being back. It's crazy to me. And even though today we're focusing on polio is not the only illness or disease that was eradicated and now is popping back up again. So
Yep.
it's just very frustrating.
Yep.
I think people need to understand its importance as to, why it's so frustrating and
Mhm.
why it's so upsetting. And I think out of all of these childhood eradicated diseases, this is probably one of the ones that I don't want back.
Well, and it's kind of one of those things where to to be talking about this is kind of odd. We live in the United States. I remember taking care of somebody who had polio as a child, and he was paralyzed. And it's, I mean, that was 20 years ago. And heck, at that point, he was in his 80s or 90s.
Mhm.
So, he was one of like the unlucky ones that got paralyzed, the lucky one that didn't die from it.
Mhm.
And so to see people that and have taken care of people that were directly affected by polio, and to be like, this is the importance of getting vaccinated right here. It's so huge. And yeah, I'm all about people having the option to make decisions and whether or not they get vaccinated or not. But I don't think people really understand what these diseases mean for a lot of people. And the polio vaccine has far, far reached this point where the benefits outweigh the risk. You know,
Wholeheartedly.
yeah, like just it's such a huge, margin there that I'm just like, I mean, it's not even a thought process for me to give that to my own children. So if I'm giving it to
Mhm.
my children, I feel safe about it. And
Well, one, it's been around forever, so
yes,
like,
it's safe
the
for
side
adults. Mhm.
effects and all of that stuff, outweigh the actual risk. You know what I mean? Or it still wouldn't be given and it still wouldn't be, distributed,
Right.
period. So the
Absolutely.
fact, yeah, the fact that we're having a conversation today in 2022 about polio is just, it's absurd. And it's unfortunate that we even have to have the conversation.
I agree, but here we are nonetheless. So some statistics. Would you like to do those, Rosa? I know that that seems like
I
your
love the
thing.
numbers. So, in the early 1950s, before vaccines were available, polio outbreaks caused more than 15,000 cases of paralysis each
Mhm,
year. Following the introduction of vaccines, specifically the travalent inactivated polio virus, that's your injection,
mhm,
in 1955, and they had the oral version in 1963. The number of polio cases fell rapidly to less than 100 in the 1960s.
mhm.
That's a significant 15,000 to 100. That's a significant decline.
Absolutely.
So in the 70s, there were fewer than 10.
Mhm.
And in 79, there were no cases of polio in the US, like that originated and came from the United States, zero. And that is in 79. So even though there's a wild virus that had been brought into the country by travelers, the last time that that happened was in 1993.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's almost like 20 years of very, very low, you know, incident.
Pretty
Like,
much obsolete. Right.
yeah,
Mhm.
eradicated in
Yep.
my opinion.
Mhm.
It's eradicated. So those polio cases dropped by 99% since 1980.
Mhm.
Recently, two countries pretty much remained infected, I guess, with polio.
Mhm. Yeah.
Two countries aren't, in my opinion, bad, but for a disease that could possibly be totally eradicated, still some work to do there.
Right.
Still some work to do.
And those are not
Just
your countries like the United States and
no,
well developed
correct.
countries. They're not, and it's unfortunate. And I know there's a lot of outreach to countries like that to try to get vaccinations out there because if we can get rid of it once and for all, we don't have to worry about it resurfacing,
Yeah,
50
I
years
think
later.
I'm not getting plugged for this, but Pampers has a very big like I don't want to say fundraiser or charity, but basically a drive to where if at one time you were purchasing like so many Pampers, they were giving away free vaccinations to
Mhm,
children in third world countries
mhm.
because they knew the importance of, trying to eradicate polio amongst, some of the other
Right,
diseases.
right.
But
I know not everybody's a fan, but, like, Bill Gates does the same thing with
no.
smallpox, things like that.
Hmm.
So it is
Yeah.
important.
It is. It is. Just this recently, just this summer, actually, is how recent we first started seeing cases of the paralytic polio. Now, we went decades and decades and decades, got numbers, statistics, math, science, research. We went decades and didn't have any. And now, here recently, as July 21st of this year, there was a case of polio from an unvaccinated individual who is actually living in New York. And because they are infected with polio, they have to be in close contact with the health department there because the
Mhm.
last thing they want is an outbreak.
And I did read some articles that are saying that upon further investigation, that looking back at, like, wastewater, I guess, samples and things like that, that they're actually tracing polio back to April of 2022. and that
Mhm.
hundreds and thousands of people could actually have polio and not know it. And that is
Mhm.
something I kind of wanted to talk. I like the JAMA brochure, journals and articles and notes,
Yes.
and they have a great little uh, picture here that kind of explains polio. 70% of people do that have it have no symptoms.
Mhm.
That does not mean that you're not contagious, and that does not mean that you're not spreading it. It just means that you're lucky. And 70% is not bad, you know, but 25% of people will have those flu-like symptoms. We'll get into that later. 1 to 5% will develop meningitis, and then 0.5% will get the muscle weakness, paralysis, and that can lead to pretty much respiratory failures because muscle weakness and not being able to breathe and having to be on a ventilator and later
Mhm.
death. Um, and you think, oh, well, that's such a small percentage. But Rosa just said that we went from having nobody that had this issue to now having something like this that's able to be spread, especially in a time where I feel like there are more people who are not getting vaccinated than ever before. And
Mhm.
so at that point, especially since this really affects children under the age of 5 more so than anybody, I don't know. That's not a gamble that I'm willing to take. And I'm all for taking gambles. If you have literature that says I don't know this is really such a good idea, that's fine. But do you really have that with polio? Not that I've been able to find.
Yeah. Well, in that article that was released and talks about, this case in New York, they're
Mhm.
finding that polio is shedding from, fecal matter,
Mhm.
and that's how it's getting into the sewer system. Um, a lot of people probably listening or watching to this are too young to remember, but back in the day, when people when children were vaccinated with the oral, and which we'll talk about here shortly, that's a live vaccine, the
Mhm.
oral is. And so a lot of people unfortunately were infected because they weren't
Mhm.
using proper hygiene when they were, changing diapers. So I think a lot of the cases, if they're still left in the US, are probably cases like that
Yeah, I didn't
from
ask.
when we
Like the
were
patient
still
that I had
using.
before, I have no idea like why or where or what or any
Mhm.
of that. I just know that he had it.
So, polio is a disabling, life threatening disease, and it's caused by the polio virus.
Mhm.
And what it does, it spreads from person to person via oral fecal route, which means mouth or, fecal matter, your
Mhm.
feces, bowel movements, however you want to say it. So, and it can affect a person's spinal cord,
Mhm.
causing paralysis, which means you can't move your body parts. And like I was saying before, you have the injection type and you
Mhm.
have the oral type.
Yep.
For a lot of years, all we had really was the oral polio vaccine, which they call like OPV. And that did have the live virus in it. And because of that, people were susceptible to catching this virus, especially if you didn't have any immunity and perhaps you didn't get the virus, the vaccination yourself. So you
Mhm.
were, at risk of catching this. Um, the United States stopped using the OPV when they realized that people could still catch and spread
Right.
the polio disease and went
Mhm.
to IPV, which basically means the injection itself. And that's usually injected into your leg or to your arm in one of the muscles. And it's been used in the United States since 2000. So for the last 22 years. And it is not active, it's an inactive form of the virus that's being used.
Mhm. And I will say I don't know, Rosa, that you mentioned this before. The person in New York who did or does have polio was not vaccinated,
Mm, I'm not surprised.
which that makes sense because if they were
Mhm.
vaccinated, then we'd have a kind of a different situation
Going
going
on.
on. We this would be a slightly different podcast,
Yes.
had that been the case. And so one of the things that we were talking about earlier was kind of your signs and your symptoms. How do you even know that you have polio? And again, if you have it, there's a 70% chance you don't know you have it because 70% of
Mhm.
people do not know. So you just don't know, which is just goes back to, good old hand washing skills and,
Not hand sanitizing. Don't go and buy all the hand sanitizer off the shelves like in 2020 and 2021. What you need to be buying off the shelves is some good old fashioned soap.
soap. Yep.
Soap.
Wash your hands to the alphabet song in your head. And when you're finished with the alphabet song, you rinse. Yeah, 20 seconds. And then about 25% of people, 1 out of 4 that have polio, they get the flu-like symptoms. So you are the sore throat, the fever, the tiredness, nausea, headaches, stomach pains, body aches, just your normal flu stuff. They last several days and go away on their own. And then again, that's breaking that down even further. There is a smaller portion. We've done 70, we've done 25, now we're down, there's only 5% of people left. That's when you start getting into the issues of things like meningitis, and that is an infection that involves the spinal cord, brain stem, brain area, and that occurs in a smaller, group of patients. That there's some variability in the virus there that can absolutely lead to paralysis. For those who don't know, the spinal cord is kind of like the highway to hell there. That's how you do everything.
Yeah.
So, if there's a problem with your spinal cord, it's gonna affect something.
Or everything.
And so the paralysis can be very severe and can, of course, lead to death because that's causes your muscles to weaken, not be able to be useful, and we need muscles for everything, including breathing.
Well, yeah, and when you think about it, it's a paralytic. Polio is a paralytic. If your lungs cannot pass air, you're going to suffocate.
Yes.
Like that's it just it's a paralytic, which means nothing's going to move.
It do
Nothing.
it doesn't work very well. And then there are cases. I wanna say patients for some reason, but I wanna say but
Well,
I'm looking
either
for the word.
or.
They both work, but, my brain is saying cases, my mouth is saying patients.
I get it.
But there are cases where kids have polio, they recover, and actually have issues later on in life.
Mhm.
So it can, like, really come back to bite you in the tail.
I think, like you were saying earlier, as parents, we just want our children to be happy, healthy, and successful members of society. I mean,
Yeah,
and successful in life.
absolutely.
So to me, it's like why wouldn't you do everything that you possibly could to protect your child,
Mhm,
especially with something that's readily available,
mhm.
can be given free at the health department and definitely covered by health insurance.
Right.
Like this isn't something that's alternative medicine. This
No,
isn't something that's new and, under a brand name and people can't afford it.
right.
This has been around for the last 22 years, this injection, and
Mhm,
probably before then, but only in use since, the
right.
2000s. So why not give your children all the opportunity that you can possibly give them? We are fortunate enough. Third world countries, they're still using OPV.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure.
That's why we're seeing cases. We're in a time where, and I think everybody saw this with coronavirus, we travel a lot. We go
Oh, yeah.
place to place to place to place,
We are very connected with the entire world.
entire
We
world.
are connected.
So, people come from those third world countries, and if they're not vaccinated, they just brought a visitor that they had no intentions on bringing
Yes.
back. And so, or they were vaccinated with the vaccine, because the IPV is not available in a
Mhm.
lot of the countries. So why not do your best living here in the US to just get the IPV and not even have to worry in the back of your mind, you know, if your child's going to end up sick or paralyzed or dead, or a loved one, because you were able to do something, but you didn't take it upon yourself to do it.
And that's very well said. I mean, and maybe some people wouldn't have a guilty conscience about that. I mean, that's not something that I was having this conversation earlier today. My grandmother is going through cancer treatments, and I went and saw her and didn't give her a hug, didn't do all this stuff because, I
Just
wanted to make sure I'm keeping my
compromised.
distance because she doesn't really have
Hmm.
an immune system right now. And I'm like, no, if you got sick, 3 days after I'd visit, I'd feel terrible. And I would think that most people would, especially given you get somebody polio and it could paralyze them or kill them, that's worse than, like, I don't know,
That's
bronchitis
some
or something
heavy
like
guilt
that.
to walk around with. That's
Yeah.
some heavy guilt. I know that would be some heavy guilt for me to carry around
Yes.
with. And it's not because like we're trying to shame people
No.
from, for not vaccinating, because I'm
No.
a firm believer, your body, your choice. But when your choice is affecting my choice and my body, that's when I have like some really serious concerns. And we all saw what could happen, with this pandemic.
Mhm.
So the possibility is always there. Measles came back with a vengeance. Smallpox had made a comeback as well. I don't want, out of all of them, I do not want polio to come back with a vengeance. So I'm not trying to shame people. I'm just trying to say, when you know better, you do better.
Right.
And if I'm being vaccinated because I care about the people that are surrounded by me, and because I don't want to hurt somebody else, I think other people should show a little bit more compassion and empathy as well.
I agree with that. And I do wanna revisit the one thing that stands out. We've touched ever so slightly on this with the hand washing thing. Um, Again, very important. Alcohol-based hand sanitizers do not work against the polio virus. There are several viruses that alcohol-based hand sanitizers are not recommended for. For those who don't know, like things like C. diff in the hospital, sometimes you'll see even in
Mhm.
hospitals where they'll either take the hand sanitizer out of the patient's room or they'll say do not use. That's because they have something that the hand sanitizer does not work to kill like it does other things. So again, very important that hand sanitizer is great. If you're like Rosa and I, you are washing and then sanitizing, or sanitizing then
Hasn't
washing.
been washing,
That's
yeah.
just kind of, I don't know, something that happens. Maybe within nursing or as you get older, I don't know.
I don't know. It could be
But
both. I don't
it
know.
is
I
something
don't
that,
know.
that you may wanna take into consideration. Like, "Oh, I'm gonna
Yeah.
put hand sanitizer on." Doesn't work for everybody.
Don't hoard the hand sanitizer. Hoard soap, for Pete's sakes. Hoard soap.
Good old fashioned hand soap. So, yeah, I digress. That's my closing argument for polio.
Yeah, and you know what? It's when you know better, you do better. Honestly, that's all I can say.
Yeah,
So, the whole point is to get your mind open enough to talk about it.
absolutely. Or
And
just
that's our
start
goal.
doing the research. Like, if you read all
Mhm.
about polio and you decide that it's a risk you're willing to take, that's great, that's fine. Just make sure that people that are around you, especially those who are susceptible, children under the age of 5 who
Mhm.
don't have a choice whether or not they get vaccinated, um, that you're doing your due diligence and being mindful of that. especially if you live in New York. Just saying, since we know it's there.
Absolutely. So you can visit our website at thenursingpostllc.com for more information about today's podcast episode or previous episodes. Definitely shop our merchandise. You can subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform as well as streaming it on your favorite platform. And you're definitely encouraged to share any thoughts or opinions that you might have. And we just want to appreciate you guys for taking the time to listen.